Good evening, humanities students. This is a walkthrough video for your civil disobedience essay. I will talk about a couple of things in this video. Number one, I will talk about finding good sources online. Number two, I will talk about potential ways to start your introduction. And number three, I will talk about body paragraph organization. So let's start with number one, finding good sources. Now, you could just do a Google search or something along those lines, but I tend to like to go to a website for a major news source or a magazine. So let's start here with CNN.com. Typically on these big websites, there'll be a little search bar built in. So let's go here, and as you can see, I've already practiced searching for this. Let's say that I chose the Dakota Access Pipeline protests as the topic of my civil disobedience essay. So I search it, and various things are going to pop up, and they're not guaranteed to be good, especially for a small paper like this, only 2 to 3 pages, where I'm only asking you to find 2 sources online. Make those 2 sources count. That'll save you a lot of time having to find extra sources. So if I scroll down, I see a lot of things here about how it's going to be, well, that's great news, being rerouted. So it looks like the protests are being successful. Pipeline victory. Okay, all this is great. Now maybe I want something a little more broad, though, a little more general, not just a very specific, here's what's happening in its most current form, here's the protest. I kind of want to look at the protest as a whole, in which case I scroll down a little further, and maybe I click, here we go. The Dakota Access Pipeline protest is at a critical point, how we got here. Okay, this was published on December 2nd, so it's very current. It's from a credible news source. I click it, and you know what to do from here. You print this out, you read it, you annotate it, you highlight anything that you think you want to use in terms of direct quotes or paraphrase information. Looks like it has little clips, it has little maps demonstrating things, photographs. Great, this could be maybe potentially an interview. It looks like. So lots of good information here. This would make for a great source, I think, even though the text is kind of minimal. It does seem to give a great overview. Let's say I go to Time Magazine. I do the same thing. I find the little search bar icon, and I search Dakota Access Pipeline. Okay. And I see what pops up. I mean, look at this one, right? I mean, yeah, I came out on October 28th, but still, that's very current. What to know about the Dakota Access Pipeline protests? This seems like an excellent source. Potentially, I'll have to read it first to figure it out. Looks like we have some text. Good, good, good. Possibly a clip here at the very top. All right, I don't know if these kind of say the same thing or if this supplements the rest of the article. You'll have to figure that out on your own. Okay, so you find good sources. And of course, remember the third source is going to be Thoreau's Civil Disobedience essay. So that one's already provided to you, and hopefully you've already read those wonderful 17 pages. So that brings us to our next step. Let's take a look at just this Word document. All right, so here's the prompt. Hopefully you picked one of these protests, and as you know, 2 to 3 page essay, 2 sources that cover the events, and of course you have to use evidence from Thoreau's original essay, Civil Disobedience, as well. So here are possible ways to start introductions. I have them written down right here. You can start with something that's very general. So if we're talking about civil disobedience, maybe I start off, and I don't want to say a definition of civil disobedience, but that would tend, that's a little cliche, but that tends to fall under this umbrella term of starting things with the general. I could start off by talking about freedom or government or what it means to be a government by the people, for the people, of the people, all of that. That's something broad, the reader can relate to it, and then you slowly start to ease them into your specific protest. Or you start talking about protests in general, why protests are important, how they bring about change. That could be a way to start things off. Illustration or anecdote. You can't really tell a personal anecdote for this. I don't think it would quite work for this essay prompt. But maybe an illustration. Maybe you find some source material about a specific, if I'm thinking about Dakota Access Pipeline, a specific Native American protester and his or her story. And so you want to start with that, or you want to describe to me in vivid detail using lots of intense imagery about what it's like to be there on the field protesting with the dogs barking and tear gas or whatever else is being used to disperse the protesters. That could be a great way to sort of paint a picture in my head, and then you start to ease me into what will eventually be your thesis statement at the end of the introduction about how your protest relates to Thoreau's argument in Civil Disobedience. Surprising fact, you can probably find lots of good facts to start things off with, like a percentage or, I don't know, some sort of statistic. Contradiction, I don't know if that's going to work. That's more of a, you're arguing something, and so you start by talking about the opposing side of the argument first. And I don't think that quite works out for this paper. You may try it. It's up to you. And finally, a quotation. If you find a meaningful, powerful quotation, that could be good. The thing with this, though, is that you're probably going to pull a quotation from Civil Disobedience, and I feel as though in the rest of your essay you're going to have lots of quotes from Civil Disobedience anyway, so I don't think it's really going to stand out in your introduction, having just another quote from Civil Disobedience. All right, so now this brings us to body paragraph construction and organization. And so I thought of like two possible ways you could really organize this thing. It's up to you. And I'm thinking in terms of basic formulaic 5-paragraph style. So you have your intro, you have your conclusion, you have 3 body paragraphs in between. One way is this. You could start off your first body paragraph just focusing on civil disobedience. All of your text evidence is from civil disobedience, direct quotes, paraphrase information, and that's all you talk about. Then you start talking about your protest, and you explain what elements of your protest Thoreau would agree with. Then, third body paragraph, you explain what elements of your protest Thoreau would disagree with, if any. Okay, so that's one way to organize it, from my perspective. There's also this method, and I think I prefer this way better, but each paragraph can essentially be the same thing, except you start off with one idea from civil disobedience. So you find like one little nugget of wisdom from civil disobedience, you directly quote Thoreau, and then you explain how the protest either supports that statement by Thoreau or rejects it or refutes it. All right, and then you do the same thing. You find a second idea, you find a third idea, and you do the exact same thing with the other body paragraphs. And it could be, I mean, this whole protest detail could be a combination of both. You could say, well, in a way, Thoreau sort of supports what they're doing, and in a way, he rejects what they're doing or frowns upon it. Okay? I think that's all I have to talk about. So if you have any more questions, please feel free to send me an email. Otherwise, good luck, students.